So San Francisco recalled its progressive district attorney Chesa Boudin. Does that mean that progressive policies on crime are doomed? Let's talk about it in today's video. Hi, I'm Mike Greiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. I'm also a lawyer and an academic, and I'm here to help you stand up to the BS of the MAGA crowd. So you might have seen all the headlines talking about how in San Francisco, progressive left-wing San Francisco, Nancy Pelosi's San Francisco, if you will, the same city where Kamala Harris was district attorney, that this city has recalled Chesa Boudin, a progressive Democratic prosecutor who promised and made moves to change many of the policies of the district attorney's office. Does his recall indicate something about the progressives and the popularity of our policies, or does it mean something else? Well, I would argue that you've got two issues that were much more impactful in the end result of Boudin's recall than his progressive policies. And one is California's recall laws, and the second is Chesa Boudin himself was an inexperienced politician and an inexperienced prosecutor. So let's start with the first one. California has a recall law that allows the recall of a politician almost as soon as they're elected to office. And in fact, that's what happened in San Francisco, where almost as soon as Chesa Boudin was elected, and elected, by the way, with nothing approaching a mandate, barely surviving the four-way primary to make it into a general election, and barely getting over 50% in the general election. So almost as soon as he was elected then, right-wing conservative William Obendorf funded a recall campaign. So literally, before Chesa Boudin could even do anything, he was already facing a recall campaign. Now, we live in such a polarized environment nowadays, an environment where politicians generally are looked on negatively, that once they're in office, if they are afraid of getting recalled without even having the chance of doing anything to try to justify their presence there, it creates a dynamic where literally they're constantly running. They can't be even trying to manage the office and show what they're capable of. I've actually myself been involved in fighting off recall campaigns on a number of occasions. And they're devilishly hard to fight off for the reason that the question isn't one imperfect human being versus another imperfect human being. The question is, do you want to get rid of an imperfect human being? It's like that old joke of people wanting to write in Mickey Mouse on the ballot. You're not comparing two imperfect choices. You're comparing an imperfect choice against a theoretical perfect choice that doesn't exist, actually. What's more is in this day and age, gathering signatures has really become more of a proxy for money than it is for real enthusiasm for a political position. It used to be that people would have to go out and gather signatures on a volunteer basis. Now, more often than not, signatures are gathered by professional signature gatherers who are paid by the signature. Now, we saw the counterintuitive result of that approach here in Michigan, where 5 of the Republican candidates for governor who had turned in what they thought were sufficient signatures to get on the ballot, turned out had been duped by the person that they hired to gather the signatures. Now, while it's hard for me to cry too many tears for those candidates, it just points out the fact that nowadays ballot access is more a function of money than it is of grassroots organizing, which is what it's supposed to be. Now, the irony is, and it just shows how misused this law is, that in actuality, the rate of violent crime in San Francisco has been going down since Chesa Boudin's been in office. So the idea that somehow he's contributed to an increase in crime really is misplaced. Now that brings us to the second reason that Chesa Boudin was recalled, which is his lack of experience, his lack of political skills. You have to remember, Boudin is a lifelong defense attorney who never was a prosecutor. His first exposure to the criminal justice system was through his parents, who, when he was a baby, were members of the violent Weather Underground and were arrested for their involvement in the robbery of a Brinks truck. As a result, Boudin would visit them in prison, and that was kind of his exposure to the criminal justice system and led to his commitment to defending criminals. He's obviously very smart and has really impressive academic credentials, by the way, having been a Rhodes Scholar, for example. But intelligence doesn't necessarily equate to political skills. There you need a certain level of emotional intelligence that frankly escapes a lot of people. I can tell you, my former boss, the mayor of Warren, who I worked closely with for years, had less than stellar academic credentials, despite the fact that he was obviously a brilliant person. But more important than his own brilliance was his incredible emotional intelligence, his ability to read people and to talk with people about where they are. Chesa Boudin completely lacked this. Now, my former boss used to always say that politics is a game of addition, not of subtraction. And that's a lesson that Chesa Boudin was woefully unaware of. As a result, he proceeded to get into fights with the police department of the city and the professional prosecutors who worked for the office that Boudin had just been elected to lead. Now, to be fair to Boudin, the San Francisco Police Department's performance is pretty pathetic, actually, with an arrest rate of reported crimes of less than 3%, one of the worst in the country. But fighting with your police department, who has literally people walking through the streets of the city every single day, talking to hundreds and thousands of people, is not going to be a recipe for political success. What's more, is Boudin pointed to the really pretty good crime statistics, actually, since he'd been in office, as evidence of his success. The thing that he was unable to do, though, is to deal with a couple of very high-profile cases that really got a lot of attention and seemed to add fuel to the fire of this narrative that he was soft on crime. So, for example, there was a video that went viral of an elderly Asian man out for a walk being violently attacked. Another one of someone shoplifting a Walgreens store, literally piling goods into a garbage bag and then jumping onto a bike and escaping. And worst of all was the case of Troy McAllister, a man who was out of prison on a plea bargain with Putin's office, who then proceeded to mow down 2 people with a stolen car on New Year's Eve 2020. Now, is it fair to blame Boudin for these things? Probably not. I mean, stuff happens, right? But the reality is that his response to those things was so flat-footed that it resulted in people thinking that he was out of touch and really unable to deal with the problem. So the point of all this is I would argue that the results of this recall effort don't so much say something about the progressive agenda as it says something about the peculiarities of the California recall system and the limitations of Chesa Boudin as a candidate. The reality, as has been pointed out in a number of places, is most Democrats anyway don't support an agenda that can realistically be painted as soft on crime. I mean, the leader of the party and our country has stated unequivocally that he does not believe in defunding the police. And at best, the defund the police movement can be painted as a minority movement within the Democratic Party. What's more, as many people have pointed out, is that some of the goals of the defund the police movement, which is more to provide additional funding for things like social support for individuals and providing negotiators to be able to come in and deal with domestic violence situations, for example, is something that many police leaders actually support. I would agree with the analysis of many people that the terms defund the police are really unfortunate, and in many cases probably have been hurtful to some Democrats on the margins. But taking the Chesa Boudin recall as some evidence of the failure of our agenda is really missing the point of what actually happened in San Francisco. Well, if you want to see more information about who's really responsible for the increases in crime, why don't you check out this video over here where I point out what the statistics say, which is that Republicans are really the ones who deserve a lot of the blame for what's going on in crime in America. I'll see you then. In the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.